Welcome. Thank you for joining the question and answer portion of today's tutorial. My name is Rob Cairns and I'm going to be one of the moderators. I am the Vice President of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers.
Hello, I'm Manyi Sun, and I'm happy to be joining Rob today as your co-moderator for our Q&A session. I am a member of the OGEHR Communications Committee, and as the email tree coordinator, I'm responsible for sending out the email that goes out on a weekly basis to our membership.
Today's tutorial on active listening was produced by Dominique Moreau. In addition to this tutorial, Dom has produced a tutorial on playing with heavy handbells, and that's now on our OGEHR website. If you missed it or you want to watch it for a second time, you can go to our website to do that. Looking at what's coming up, Dom also has tutorials on how to use a metronome on January 10th, meters on February 6th, and meloding on March 6th. So we have a whole bunch of great tutorials to look forward to from Dom.
Dom, welcome back. It's lovely to have you again.
Thanks.
Dom is a percussionist and music teacher who resides in Ottawa. Dom plays with the Ottawa Symphony Orchestra and teaches at Gisèle-Lalonde High School and the Ottawa Youth Orchestra. He plays with the St. Andrew's Ringers at St. Andrew's Presbyterian. At this point, we will be taking questions submitted over the Zoom text chat.
Okay, so Dom, our first question then, are there any particular things that are more important for us to listen for when we're doing active listening?
Yes. I mean, it depends on why you're doing the active listening. If you're listening to learn the music, you'll focus on more objective aspects of the music, such as probably the notes or the rhythms or the tempo and the phrasing, things like that. If you're listening with a different goal in mind, which might be more critical, if you say, like if you're doing mixing or mastering in a studio, when you want to find out all of the mistakes that are there, you even want to find the noise that's not supposed to be there, that's not even part of the music, for example. Or if you're a music teacher, well, when you're teaching, you're supposed to listen to the students and then give feedback so they can improve. So you need to find what's good and what's bad and what they can improve, what's not in the sheet music, or what they can add on top of the sheet music, as a lot of people know that music doesn't stop at what's printed on the paper. So the answer is yes, but it's really dependent on the reason behind your active listening. If I'm transcribing music, for example, I will really try to pay attention to one line at a time and to every single detail I can notate on the page. But I might not be that specific in my listening if I'm just listening to learn music, or if I'm just trying to see, oh, do I like this new music I'm listening to, for example.
It really is interesting the way you put that, because the purpose that you're listening for really plays a big role in this. This workshop really is geared towards players listening, but I know as a director, I would listen for different things. And when I've been producing CDs, I've been listening for different things there. So it really is, what is your purpose for listening? And that's an excellent point. Sorry, man, you go ahead now.
I was actually going to ask, as from the perspective of a handbell ringer who's been presented with a piece of music that they're from their director, who gave it to them weeks in advance so that they could prepare. If I'm in that position, what order would I be wanting to pay attention to? All the details that you identified in your handout. What would you focus on first? And then as you become more familiar with the music, you would look at additional details. So how would you order your listening?
Okay, that is a very good question you're asking, Manny. What order? So again, the purpose will play a role in this. I think the first thing you should do when you're learning a piece of music is just learn the form. What comes when? Things that repeat. If you've got any repetition, then you know for sure that you either this is more important, you need to practice it a lot, or hey, I've practiced it once. I don't need to practice it for every single time it reappears, especially if it's in the same key. If everything's the same. I like to think of a lot of church hymns as an example for that. The lyrics change, but pretty much everything else is the same every single verse, unless you've got a fancy music director that likes to change things up a little bit. But often it's the form is very, very repetitive. Pop music's like that as well. So if the piece you're playing has a lot of repetition, then that's the first thing you do is listen to form for repetition for when is the most important part of the piece, and how the sections play together. Sometimes you have sections, I mean, very often you have a section which its purpose is to be contrasting with the rest of the music. So it's good to be aware of all that, the form, and that will lead into the next part. With if you're practicing music, is to focus on the parts that you have problem with. I call that listening in chunks. That's my little phrase for that. But find the spots that you have trouble with and listen to that spot over and over. And if you're a handbell ringer, as you said, you can go and try to listen to what your 2 or 3 notes are doing, and how they play, how they tie in with what everyone else is doing. And if you can pinpoint them in the recording, it will be a lot easier to learn them. It can be hard to learn those 2, listen to those 2 handbells alone, but it's a good challenge that you can do once you get really good at listening actively, is play your 2 notes on the piano and then try to find them in the music whenever they happen, even without the music, or with the music once you're familiar enough with the piece.
We have a question from Maggie in the chat, and excuse me, she's asking if closing your eyes might help.
If you tend to get caught on things that happen to be in your field of vision, definitely a good idea. Same thing for other distractions, whether it's auditive or visual. I personally really like to do active listening with noise-canceling headphones, so that there's nothing else coming in but the music. And I don't need to just put it really loud to cover everything else. I really just don't have anything else. It's just the music I'm listening to.
Really focusing your attention.
Exactly. Because with active listening, the goal is to have your attention on that, only on the music you're listening to, so avoid distractions. For the same reason, it's really hard to read the newspaper when your kids are playing in the next room. Well, it might be hard to listen to music if your cat's playing on the ground in front of you with their toys. So yeah, try to find a space that is easier to limit distractions. And yeah, if closing your eyes helps, for sure. It's definitely one tool in the toolbox you can use when you're doing the listening, for sure.
So when you are active listening, so going back to I'm learning a new piece and I've got my music and I'm listening to the recording, do you make notes on your music? I mean, obviously you wouldn't be doing that with your eyes closed, but do you make markings? You know, you kind of write little notes to yourself?
Not always, but yes, it's definitely something I do sometimes. When I'm playing with Ottawa Symphony, very often I try to get a copy of the score if I can, and then I have my part, the score, the music, and I'm listening for everything, and I'm watching the score, and I'm trying to listen who I'm playing with. So if I'm playing xylophone, for example, oftentimes I'm playing with the woodwinds. It's very often what's going to happen. So I mark a note of who I play with in my part, so I know who to look for. I mean, the conductor is useful and all, but visual connection with the people that actually make sound is very, very important. And woodwind players breathe before they play. So I will look at them, see their breath, and play with them based on the visual cue. I will also make notes on sometimes, depending on the instrument that I play. As a percussionist, I play a bunch of different instruments in the orchestra, depending on the piece, on the concert. So I will make notes on different instruments, on what kind of emotion or mood I'm trying to create. Bass drum, for example, has a lot of, sometimes it's emulating thunder, It's not supposed to be a bass drum sound. It's supposed to be a sound effect. Or sometimes it's just supposed to add depth to the sound. And I will mark myself little notes. I'm not writing novels or anything, but it's just 1 or 2 words so that I know what sound I'm going for at that point. And I do that as well in my handbell music. Sometimes if it's I need to be very joyous or something, well, I'm not going to play the same way as if it's I mean, I don't want to see funeral music, but sad music. You won't hit the bell with the same articulation to match the mood. So I do sometimes mark that, especially as a director, when it's a handbell music, so that I know what I want from the ensemble and I don't forget that when I'm in the rehearsal.
Right. So you're trying to give yourself some musical context for what the piece is doing at the time.
Yes,
that makes sense.
So I do take notes, but it all depends. Like when I'm transcribing music, I'm literally writing down every single note I'm hearing. So obviously that's a different case of active listening and note taking. Because with my rock band, sometimes I just write out the entire piece of music from top to bottom for every instrument. And that takes hundreds and hundreds of listenings. And that's where the listening in chunks is super helpful as well, because I don't need to listen to the whole piece if I'm just working on 2 bars.
Right. Yeah. So I do the same thing when I'm transcribing music. Sometimes you can really just get the structure mapped out, and it's often verse, chorus, bridge, and then outro. And then I'm lazy. So if I can just, the chorus, it's the same every time. I'll just listen to it the once and be done with it. And I think the same can apply for handbell music. When you do have parts that repeat over and over, you listen to it carefully the one time, and then once you've got it, you make sure that when it comes back, it is actually the same, because sometimes it can be tricky. Sometimes there can be slight variations as the chorus comes back, so you do have to be careful. But as a general rule, you can definitely make it easier on yourself by recognizing that that parts of the music do repeat as part of the structure.
One thing I'll point out for handbells, actually, because if you're playing something and then there's a modulation and it comes back in a different key, well, if you're playing piano or flute or something, you're still the melody and not much has changed except the key. But if you're playing handbells, when the key changes, all of a sudden you're shifted in the melody. Your role is not the same. So joints is always in C major. That's an easy case. Whenever it comes back, you're the same place in the melody. But if you're playing A and B, for example, and you're playing in C major, well, you're going back to C, probably with the leading tone or something like that. But if it modulates to G, all of a sudden, well, you're the third. You're not going to play in the same chords. You're not going to play at the same point in the melody. And so for a handbell musician, that's actually quite difficult sometimes, because the repetition musically is the same, but technically you're playing something completely different.
That's actually a really good point, Dom, because sometimes, especially if you have a certain part, if you're playing a run and you're in a sequence, the first few times it comes, it's in the one key, you're always at the same part of the run, but suddenly after the modulation, now your notes are in a different spot in the run, and all of a sudden that completely throws you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
because
definitely
the music well at that point, and you're trying to play the same way, but you're not supposed to do the same thing.
Yeah, that's definitely something that you could be listening for during your active listening.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Dom.
Yep.
Brings up an interesting point. We all have a number of players in our groups who are really experienced musicians, and we also have players who are just kind of at the beginning of learning their music theory and that sort of thing. What about for players who don't have as much theory experience? How do they go about listening to something, for instance, like harmony?
Okay, so when you're listening for harmony, and you don't know the theory at all, you don't know what a dominant is, you don't know what a tonic is, you might be lost with the 2 words I just said. In that case, try to listen to how you're feeling about are the notes that you're hearing making you feel a certain sense of going somewhere, of tension? Tension wants to resolve in music. If you've got tension, it wants to go somewhere. So I'm tempted. I just have a little melodica next to me, so I'll just play a little something. Sorry, it's not handbells on OGEHR. I'm very sorry about that. But you're in C major, and you hear a chord like this one. It wants to go somewhere. I'm playing this, and I'm sure some of you are like, I'm waiting for the next. And now you're in a spot where musically it's stable. There's no tension anymore. So it's just a little example like that. But harmony is basically tension and resolution. Tension, and then you're home, or you're somewhere that has less tension or more tension. And listen for those tensions. If you hear for notes that want to go somewhere. Some notes have a direction, and some phrases have a direction, and that's basically what harmony is. It's just a very fancy system of numbers and terms that explain this tension very specifically and their resolution. So start with that. Start with trying to listen for tension and or absence of tension. Joints, for example, has the middle section doesn't have very much tension. It's very stagnant harmonically. It's going from chord. I think I mentioned it in the workshop. It's going from a G chord to an A flat chord, back to a G chord to an A flat chord. There's very, very little motion harmonically, and that's because there's very little tension, at least in the harmony. The melody sort of bringing the piece forward, but not the harmony. So sometimes you just do that. If I forget about that melody playing, is the rest of the notes helping the music move forward, or is it not? So either sense of direction or tension is basically what I would be listening for. That being said, don't hesitate to try and learn more theory. It's always helpful, and there's many resources online now. So it's never too late to start learning music theory. Especially if you're already a musician, it's fairly easy. And try to sing things to yourself. That's the best way to start learning harmony and music theory. Sing things to yourself and try to wonder, oh, have I seen this before in another piece of music? And you'll figure out that music actually is very repetitive over different pieces. It's very, some patterns repeat quite a lot in music. I hope that
I
answers your
understand
question,
what you mean about resolving tension. It seems like the musical joke of every high school class that at the end of a class, somebody will get up, walk to the piano, play a dominant seventh chord, and walk out.
Yep.
And just leave it hanging in the air there for everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Or the good old major scale. Da 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 da.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dom, so that's some great advice for ringers who maybe aren't quite so familiar with harmony. What about rhythm and meter and time signatures? How, as a relatively novice ringer, how can I be listening to meters in a new piece of music?
Meters is basically how we're arranging the notes rhythmically. It tells you how they go. So try to find places where you feel like you can start counting from there. Usually the music starts at 1. It's fairly simple. And then try to count. 1 should be the strongest beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, wait, I heard a strong beat again. It has to be less than 5. So that's a little trick I give sometimes to my students at school. Try to listen, try to count out loud. And does it match the music you're listening to? Because meter usually is repetitive. If it's a bar in 3/4, for example, well, it's got 3 beats. So try to listen, and try to count out loud along, and does it match? And you'll probably eventually find something. I find that kids learn it really quickly, so I don't see why adults would not learn it quickly.
Well, children have very plastic brains, and they adapt very quickly.
Yes,
sometimes old
true.
dogs are difficult for old dogs to learn new tricks.
That is true. But old dogs also have more experience, and they can rely on that experience to learn.
That's true.
If you're a dancer, try dancing to music. Try dancing to the music you listen. You'll find a meter pretty quickly. Music, if you can dance the same way you dance to pop music, it's probably 4/4. That's probably your meter. You probably don't need to worry too much. A lot of music is in 4/4. If you can dance to something as if it was a waltz, then you're in 3. If you have that feeling of lilt, I will say, it's probably in 3. Or some sort of ternary meter that like 6/8 or 9/8 that has a more floaty feeling, if I can put it that way. Sometimes it's difficult. Like, is this in 2 or is this in 4? That's probably the hardest question you'll ever have to answer as a musician, and sometimes both answers are valid. Because they're very similar. Meters in 2 and meters in 4 are quite similar for the feeling, for the audience.
Right. So I personally am a terrible dancer. So in order to get the physical aspect of it, would you also would you tap along to the music, drum on your knee, or clap your hands?
Definitely an option. That being said, even if your dancing isn't beautiful, that doesn't mean that it doesn't flow with the rhythm. Just do it somewhere where no one can see you.
You haven't seen my dancing. You're being far too kind.
Do it where no one can see, and then you'll be fine. No one's going to judge you.
Well, thanks, Dom.
But,
well, on that
dancing
note, that seems like an excellent spot to wrap up today's Q&A. We can finish up and everybody can go off and do a little bit of dancing somewhere. We'd like to thank Dom for presenting this Q&A this afternoon. And just a reminder that on the active listening page on our website, there is a handout with a lot of excellent points, which you can go and download and have a look at and use for your active listening.
Yes, and the handout, please feel free to share it with all of your musical friends and handbell aficionados. So again, we wanted to thank Dom for a fantastic tutorial and a great Q&A session today. And we invite you to join us next Sunday, December 13th, and plan to be part of our next handbell tutorial. Our clinician will be Lisa Kyriakides, who will be presenting a tutorial on how to mark your score efficiently. So we hope you encourage your OGEHR friends to join us both for the video and the subsequent Q&A session.
On behalf of the Ontario Guild of English Handbell Ringers, we would like to thank all of you for joining us for this question and answer session on active listening.